everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking a closer look at a problem that doesn't get enough attention: the medical gaslighting of autistic women.
It's a really important topic.
And we've got a bunch of sources to dig into, like this blog post with a pretty powerful title: Cheap ABA Autistic Women and Medical Gaslighting, a Silent Epidemic.
Wow. That's intense.
It is. And we've also got this article called The Hidden Truth Revealed: Uncovering the Unique Challenges of Women on the. We'll get into all the details of that later.
I'm ready to dive in.
Me too. And our mission today is to give you the knowledge to understand this complex issue and its implications. So,
I think the first thing we need to do is define what we're talking about.
you're right. What exactly echoes medical gaslighting?
Well, it's not just about misunderstandings. It's about a systemic pattern of dismissal and invalidation.
Whoa.
Yeah, it has serious consequences for autistic women trying to get health care.
Okay, so it's not just a one-off bad experience with a doctor.
Not at all.
It's a pattern of being ignored or not taken seriously.
Exactly. So let's get specific. What does this look like? Like, imagine an autistic woman goes to the doctor because she's dealing with terrible fatigue.
Yeah, that's a common issue, right?
It is, but instead of trying to figure out what's causing it, the doctor just says, oh, it's probably stress or anxiety.
And that's it.
Or maybe she's having digestive problems.
Yeah.
The doctor might suggest it's all in her head, even though she's tried everything to change her diet.
Wow.
And this cheap ABA blog post lists so many symptoms that autistic women say doctors have dismissed. Things like chronic pain,
Right.
sensory sensitivities, even neurological problems.
Yeah.
It's like a constant battle just to be heard.
It's heartbreaking. These are real struggles.
Absolutely.
And this isn't just a handful of incidents,
No,
right?
no, it's much bigger than that. It's like a silent
A
epidemic
silent epidemic.
affecting so many autistic women, and
Right.
the silence itself is part of the problem.
That's interesting. Why do you think it goes unreported and unrecognized so often?
Well, I think there are a few reasons. First, there's the stigma around autism.
Especially for women. Right.
Exactly. Like this idea that autism is mostly a male thing and that girls are different.
That's so outdated.
I know, right? But it leads to misdiagnoses and just a lack of understanding from healthcare providers.
So even when an autistic woman is trying to speak up for herself, she's already at a disadvantage because of these biases.
Got it.
And I imagine the communication barriers some autistic women experience make it even harder.
Oh, absolutely. Trying to explain your symptoms when eye contact is hard or you're overwhelmed by a rapid-fire question, it creates this disconnect between the doctor and patient.
That makes a lot of sense. And I bet social anxiety, which a lot of autistic people deal with, makes it even tougher to be assertive in those situations.
Absolutely. It's like all these pressures come together. The pressure on women to be agreeable and not rock the boat, the communication barriers, and the stigma. It's like a perfect storm for medical gaslighting.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. But before we get deeper into the specific gender-related challenges, let's talk about the impact of this gaslighting.
Okay.
What are the real-world consequences?
Oh, they can be devastating, both physically and emotionally.
Really?
Think about it. Living with something debilitating for years, maybe even decades, without the right diagnosis or treatment because you weren't taken seriously.
That's awful.
It can make symptoms worse, cause unnecessary suffering, and completely erode trust in the healthcare system.
So it's like a double whammy.
Exactly.
They're already facing health challenges, and they're less likely to get the right care because of this gaslighting.
And that distrust makes it even harder to seek help in the future, even when it's desperately needed.
So it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, seeking help leads to more invalidation, which prevents them from getting the care they need. It's awful.
It's a terrible situation, and that's why it's so important to understand this and start pushing for change.
Couldn't agree more.
But before we get to solutions, let's explore the unique challenges autistic women face.
Sounds good.
We'll get into that right after this. All right, so we know medical gaslighting is a huge problem for autistic women.
Yeah.
But why are they especially vulnerable? What's going on with autism and gender that makes this happen?
It's interesting, right? Autistic women face this kind of double set of expectations.
How so?
Well, they're supposed to fit into these norms of what it means to be a woman.
Right.
But at the same time, they're trying to navigate the world with a neurodevelopmental difference that often gets missed or misunderstood.
So they're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. Society tells women to be agreeable and nurturing and not cause trouble, but autism can make it hard to follow those rules.
In what way?
Well, autistic women might struggle with things like social cues or showing emotions in typical ways,
I see.
or they might have trouble with certain sensory experiences, and that can lead to misunderstandings.
Especially in medical settings where communication is so important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it feels like they're punished for not fitting into these neat little boxes.
Right, right.
And this pressure to fit in can lead to what we call masking, where autistic women try to hide their autistic traits.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine how draining that must be?
Yeah.
Constantly monitoring your behavior and suppressing your natural instincts.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. It takes a toll on mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
And it can make it harder for doctors to recognize the autism, which can lead to misdiagnoses and the wrong treatment.
That makes sense. You know, The Hidden Truth Revealed talked about that pressure to mask.
Okay.
It said some women don't even realize they're autistic until much later in life because they've gotten so good at hiding it.
It's kind of tragic, isn't it?
Right.
They're punished for blending in when they're actually carrying this huge burden.
That's a good point. And it brings up another important thing. How autism and gender intersect when it comes to specific health problems.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's not just the social and emotional stuff. Autistic women might have physical health needs that get overlooked too.
You're absolutely right. Research is showing they might be more prone to things like autoimmune disorders,
Wow.
gastrointestinal issues, chronic fatigue syndrome.
And because of those biases we talked about,
Yeah.
these problems often get brushed off as all in their head.
Exactly. It's this awful cycle.
They're more likely to have these health challenges, but they're less likely to be taken seriously when they seek help.
And that can have terrible long-term effects. Imagine dealing with chronic pain for years, being told it's just anxiety, only to find out much later that it was something treatable all along.
That's infuriating.
It is. And that cheap ABA blog post had some really shocking stats about how late autistic women often get diagnosed.
Yeah, it's scary.
We're talking years, sometimes decades, of missed chances for early intervention.
It makes you think about all the suffering that could have been avoided if they had been listened to from the beginning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what can we do about this? How do we fix this mess?
Well, that's the big question, right? I mean, it's not an easy fix, is it?
Not really, but there are things we can do, both as individuals and as a society. And the good news is these sources we've been looking at offer some real solutions.
That's what I love about these deep dives. We don't just complain about the problems,
Yeah.
we actually look for ways to make things better.
Exactly.
So what are some of the key takeaways when it comes to solutions?
Well, the first thing is awareness.
Okay.
We need to educate ourselves, our communities, and healthcare professionals about what autistic women go through.
That's a great start.
We need to challenge those old stereotypes and start recognizing the many ways autism can show up.
Knowledge is power, for sure. But what about concrete actions? What can people do to make a difference?
There's so much you can do. Even small things can have a big impact.
Like what?
Start by listening to autistic women. Believe them when they talk about their experiences.
Yeah.
Validate their feelings. Don't interrupt or give advice they didn't ask for.
I can do that.
Just listen with empathy and understanding. It sounds simple, but it can make a huge difference for someone who's used to being ignored.
It's about creating a space where they feel safe to be themselves.
You got it.
Mm.
And if you're a professional working with an autistic woman, especially in healthcare, think about your communication style.
Right?
Speak clearly, avoid jargon, give them time to process information.
Okay.
Don't assume they get it just because they're nodding. Ask questions. Make sure they feel comfortable asking questions too.
These are all great tips. And for those of us who really care about this issue,
Yeah.
we can also push for bigger changes, right?
Yeah.
Like supporting organizations that are working to improve healthcare for autistic women,
Definitely.
advocating for policies that promote inclusivity and calling out discrimination when we see it.
Exactly. We need to fight for systemic change.
Those are all fantastic ideas. It feels like there's a lot we can do to build a more supportive and understanding environment for autistic women.
There is.
And before we wrap up, I want to go back to the sources for a sec.
Oh.
They mentioned some specific organizations that are doing amazing work in this area. Can you tell us more about them?
Yeah, I think our listeners would really appreciate that.
So 2 organizations that really stood out were the Autism Women's Network and the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network.
I've heard of those. What do they do
They
exactly?
do a lot of great work. They offer tons of resources and information specifically for autistic women.
Okay.
They help women connect with each other, which builds a sense of community and understanding.
But the community aspect must be so
But
important.
it's huge, especially for women who felt isolated and dismissed by the healthcare system.
Yeah, I can
It's
see
like to finally find other people who get it,
Right.
who can support you and validate your experiences.
It can be life-changing.
Absolutely. And they also provide training for healthcare professionals
Well, that's smart.
to help bridge that gap in understanding and create a more welcoming environment.
So they're really attacking this problem from all sides.
Yeah, empowering individuals, building community, advocating for change. It's awesome. And the Hidden Truth Revealed mentioned another group, the National Autistic Society.
They're great too.
They have a ton of resources on their website, especially for women and girls on the spectrum.
That's right.
We'll be sure to include links to all of these in the show notes.
Perfect.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I'm feeling kind of a mix of emotions. It's sad to hear about the struggles autistic women face,
Definitely.
but I'm also hopeful knowing there are people and organizations out there fighting for change.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I think the main takeaway for our listeners is that we can all contribute to this change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's educating ourselves about autism,
Right?
listening to autistic women with empathy,
Yeah.
or supporting organizations that are advocating for their rights.
Every action, big or small, can help create a more inclusive and understanding world.
That's what it's all about.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And to build on that, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Imagine a world where autistic women feel seen, heard, and respected everywhere, especially in healthcare. That's the dream.
Where their strengths are celebrated and their challenges are met with compassion. That's a world worth fighting for, and one we can create together. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive, and keep learning.